What if Zoro could steal the devil fruits of everyone he defeated? What kind of abilities would he end up collecting? And more importantly, how would this change his fighting style? Now, before we get started, let's establish a few quick rules. The stealing happens automatically upon defeat, and from there, Zoro either has to eat the fruit himself, feed it to his swords, or give it to someone else. He also has the option to hold onto a stolen fruit in his inventory for as long as he wants to, but he can only hold one at a time. Holding 2 fruits in the inventory will kill him. Those are the rules. We're going to talk about every fruit Zoro steals from his victims throughout the story, and at the end, we'll also talk about the broken devil fruits Zoro may steal from his future victims. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and with that, let's begin. To start things off, the East Blue Saga happens the exact same way, because you see, none of Zoro's victims in this saga are devil fruit users. The divergence point happens during the Little Garden arc, where Zoro cuts down Mr. 5 with his Yaki Onigiri attack, and immediately, Mr. 5's knocked out body drops the Bomb fruit, kind of like how defeated enemies in video games drop loot. Then, the fruit shoots straight towards Zoro, who instinctively slaps it away in confusion, and as luck would have it, the fruit gets shoved directly into Usopp's mouth, who was standing just a few meters away. Just like that, Usopp accidentally becomes the Bomb fruit user. He gains the ability to make any part of his body explode. But what's funny is that Usopp and Zoro don't realize what just happened until Usopp's snot accidentally drops onto the ground. The snot creates an explosion that sends him flying upward Team Rocket style. Though, of course, thanks to the natural immunity of the fruit, Usopp doesn't suffer any damage. Fast forward to Alabasta, and Usopp's bomb abilities come in handy against Baroque works. Whenever Miss Merry Christmas tries digging through the ground, Usopp just spams explosive blasts directly into her tunnels, while remaining completely immune to the explosions himself. To be fair, he was a bit grossed out at first, since he has to use his own mucus, or grime, to create explosions. But now that he's learned to use it alongside his actual fighting style, his self-esteem has improved. I mean, why would you feel insecure when you could just blow things up? Also, fun fact, Ganzui is a member of the Rocks Pirates, and was the user of this fruit before Mr. 5. Now, this is just the very first fruit Zoro has stolen, and you can already see how it's shifting the Straw Hat dynamics. But keep watching, because it only gets more interesting from here. The second steal happens after Zoro unlocks the Breath of All Things to beat Mr. 1. As Mr. 1 falls, he drops the Dice fruit. And if that fruit sounds recent, it's because this is the exact same fruit Dr. Vegapunk gave Mihawk's Seraphim clone, S-Hawk. So, what do you think? Would it be a good idea for Zoro to eat a fruit like this? Well, here's how it plays out. Mr. 1 drops the fruit as loot, and Zoro realizes that what happened with Mr. 5 wasn't a one-time thing. For some unknown reason, he has gained the power to beat the devil fruits right out of his victims' bodies. Alright, so unlike last time where he slapped the fruit right into Usopp's mouth, he actually picks it up this time. But the moment he holds it, the fruit gets absorbed into Zoro's body without his consent. As it turns out, he has to eat a stolen fruit before the system can explain the rules. As for the rules, let me remind you that he'll either have to eat a stolen fruit himself, or he can give it to someone else, and he can also choose to hold it, but can only hold one devil fruit at a time. Of course, Zoro is confused because if he has already consumed the Dice fruit, how can he eat more fruits? Could it be that he can consume more than one fruit? Well, the system laughs and tells him that he can test it out and see if he dies after eating 2 of them. Alternatively, he can feed stolen fruits to his swords. At least the stolen Zoan fruits, that is. Zoro is confused because he had no idea that inanimate objects could eat a devil fruit. But being the stoic guy that he is, he welcomes the suggestion. Continuing on with the story, we get to that Alabasta bomb sequence. Zoro asks Usopp if he can just eat the bomb and digest it like Mr. 5 used to do with explosions. This freaks Usopp out, and he tells Zoro there is no way he's gonna do that. And to be fair, Chopper backs him up. Chopper explains that even if Usopp's internal organs are 100% immune to the fire and heat of an explosion, his body still can't handle that much raw kinetic energy. If he tried it, he'd die. So Hell saves the day, just like in the manga. And then the entire Skypiea saga plays out pretty much the exact same way. The face-off with Aokiji goes the same way as well. But things shift once again when we hit Water 7, because you see, Usopp has way better self-esteem in this timeline. When he goes to the Franky family's base all alone to get the stolen money back, rather than getting beaten senseless, he spams explosions and blows up the entire base. Of course, he still won't be able to recover the money because Franky is already on his way to buy the Atom Tree wood. But destroying the Franky family does give Usopp a lot of self-satisfaction. Now, he'll still argue with Luffy and even fight him over the Going Merry, but this time, he won't actually leave the crew. Instead, he tells everyone that he will find a way to fix the ship himself, and Luffy promises to take his word back if he does. This means Usopp still goes off on his own for a bit, but during the Enies Lobby arc, he won't need to ask Sogeking from Sniper Island to help the crew in his place, which means that it'll be all Usopp. For example, when Luffy orders the world government's flag to be burned down, it's Usopp doing it this time, and not Sogeking. Speaking of Enies Lobby, it's time for Zoro's third devil fruit steal, and as you can tell, it happens as he defeats Kaku. While Zoro is joking around and telling Kaku that he can always find a job at the zoo, Kaku drops the Ox fruit model Giraffe as loot. Zoro facepalms palms because he just made that joke. How is Kaku going to find a job at the zoo if he is no longer a giraffe? Well, anyway, since Zoro has the option to hold the fruit in his inventory, he decides to just pocket it for now and keep moving forward. But as fate would have it, he can only hold onto one for so long. Remember during the climax of the arc when the Straw Hats are holding off the Marines while Luffy fights Lucci? In the manga, a Marine captain named Shu uses the power of the Rust fruit to turn Zoro's Yubashiri sword into rust. And well, the exact same thing happens here. The difference is that in the manga, Soga King saves Zoro by hitting Shu with a Firebird Star. But here, Zoro simply turns his arm into a blade using the Dice fruit. He finishes the swing and defeats the Marine captain. But this creates a problem. You see, Shu drops the Rust fruit as loot. Zoro is already holding onto Kaku's giraffe fruit. He can't hold both of them at the same time or he'll die. He has to make a choice right then and there, and he decides to feed the giraffe fruit to his Sandai Kitetsu. We're talking about the cursed sword that Zoro tested his luck against back in Loketown by throwing it in the air to see if it would slice his arm off. So yeah, it was already a cursed sword, and now it's a cursed sword that can literally turn into a giraffe. Zoro was really not sure how to feel about what he just did, but at least he avoided certain death. And he has also learned his lesson. He doesn't know when another enemy might drop a devil fruit, so he definitely doesn't want to hold onto the rust fruit for too long. But it's also completely useless to him. If he feeds it to his Wano Ichimonji, the sword he inherited from Kuina, which represents his entire promise to become the world's strongest swordsman, it could make the blade useless for actual sword fighting. To begin with, does Zoro know that his swords can only eat Zoan fruits? Well, anyway, he tries to get rid of it. He asks Nami, Sanji, and even Franky if they want the fruit. But nope, nobody wants an ability like that. When Kobe and Helmeppo arrive at Water 7 with Garp, Zoro asks them as well if they'd be interested. But they pass on it too. Ultimately, with no other options, Zoro looks at Usopp and asks if they can just feed the fruit to Usopp's slingshot. Usopp goes, huh? And in response, Zoro shows him exactly what he means by transforming his Sandai Kitetsu into a giraffe form. Wait, speaking of that sword, how would a giraffe sword actually work in combat? It would obviously change Zoro's usual fighting style, but how? Let's see. His Sandai Kitetsu would now be able to randomly extend mid-swing, catch his enemies off guard, and even sprout a long giraffe neck to attack from weird angles. Plus, we already have an example of a sword with a Zoan devil fruit from the actual manga, like Shamrock's sword, which seems to have eaten a mythical Zoan Cerberus fruit. Plus, in the SBS for Volume 98, Oda revealed that if Zoro were to ever get a devil fruit power, he'd want Zoro's sword to eat Kaido's Azure Dragon fruit rather than Zoro himself. This tells us that the idea of Zoro fighting with a Zoan sword is already something Oda has thought about. Now, coming back to the story, when Usopp sees the giraffe sword, he's impressed, but he isn't shocked. After all, he already fought Mr. Four's gun dog, Lasso, back in Alabasta, so he knows weapons can eat fruits. Also, Usopp drops a gun fact that makes Zoro feel stupid. He explains that the rust fruit is a paramecia type, not a Zoan. Basically, inanimate objects can only eat Zoan fruits because Zoans are the only fruits that have a will of their own. A paramecia fruit simply won't work on a slingshot because there would be no will. At this point, Zoro crashes out and decides he'll just force-feed the rust fruit to the very next random enemy he defeats. So, moving on to Thriller Bark, even though Zoro is technically down to 2 swords after losing Yubashiri, he can still use his iconic 3-sword style by simply turning his bare arm into a blade using the Dice fruit. He defeats Zombie Ryuma with his 3-sword style, which impresses Ryuma because he had never even thought of using 3 swords. Ryuma gives him his legendary Black Blade Shisui. Then, the rest of Thriller Bark plays out the same way, including the legendary climax where Zoro takes all of Luffy's pain and Brook joins the crew. Now, as they are out at sea again, Zoro fills Brook in on his weird ability to steal devil fruits and how he needs to get rid of the rust fruit before he ends up defeating another fruit user and dying from the 2-fruit rule. Brook laughs and jokes that since he's already dead, maybe his skeleton body could handle a second devil fruit. Zoro obviously doesn't want to risk his new crewmate's life, so he jokes back by asking, "What if your bones rust?" But Brook just laughs and replies, "Bones don't rust!" However, fast forward a little bit longer to Subodi Archipelago, where a single pacifista pushes the entire crew to extreme diff. As Sentomaru pulls up with another pacifista and the crew is completely exhausted, Brook remembers what Zoro told him. He asks Zoro to give him the rust fruit and explains that it would be super effective against a metallic entity like their opponent. But Zoro flat out refuses. It's just too risky. But then the situation gets even worse because Kizaru shows up. Zoro can't physically go on any longer, and even though Rayleigh steps in to stall Kizaru, the Straw Hats are still cornered with no way out. Brook asks Zoro for the fruit one more time. He tells him to trust him because he knows his dead body can handle a second fruit. Zoro can somehow see the fear and uncertainty in Brook's eye sockets, but he respects Brook's resolve and hands over the Rust fruit, and it somehow works. The moment Brook eats it, he leaps into action, slashes PX1, and completely neutralizes it by rusting the cyborg from the inside out. But wait, how did it work? There are more than one reason, and these reasons are technically different from why Blackbeard could eat two fruits. You see, the reason why you can't eat two fruits is because eating a second fruit would cause the two devil fruits to clash, which would make your body explode. But because Brook's body has already experienced its destruction and is now sustained purely by soul energy, the conflict would no longer apply to him. Plus, Brook's first fruit allows him to project his own soul as energy, so Brook's body itself could potentially reorganize to contain the two devil fruits without any clash. He'd do this subconsciously after eating the Rust fruit, because he can't manipulate soul energy yet. But later, after the time skip, he'll be able to do it consciously. Alright, coming back to our story. Things calm down for a split second after Brook defeats the Pacifista, but then the real Kuma appears. He takes off his glove and raises his paw to send Zoro away. Brook rushes in to try and rust Kuma, but unfortunately, he gets smacked and sent flying first. And then Zoro, a second later, followed by the rest of the Straw Hats. From there, the Summit War Saga and the 2-year time skip play out mostly the same. The only major difference is that when Brook gets captured and locked in a cage by the Long Arm tribe, he easily escapes by rusting the metal bars of his cell, and then tames them with his music as a free man. He obviously still goes on to become the Soul King. Now, moving past the time skip, Zoro doesn't get any Devil Fruit victims during the Fishman Island arc. His next big steal, and his 5th steal overall, happens on Punk Hazard when he defeats Monet, who drops the Logia-type Snow Fruit as loot. Now, what should he do with a Logia? He decides to hold on to it for the time being, and then at the end of the arc, he asks Nami if she'd like it. He points out that a snow fruit would perfectly complement her weather-based Climatact. Nami is interested, and Usopp starts hyping up the idea too. He explains it would give her Logia intangibility, meaning physical attacks would just pass right through her. And even though snow isn't quite as cold as Aokiji's Ice fruit, Usopp points out that she could use her weather knowledge to compress her snow into ultra-dense ice, or unleash blizzard attacks with overwhelming attack potency. That sells Nami on the idea. The intangibility alone made her consider eating the fruit, but the weather synergy is just too perfect. By the way, fun fact, in the SBS for Volume 98, Oda mentioned that if Nami were to get a fruit, the Lightning Logia would suit her the best. It'd turn her into an unstoppable weather lady. But when you think about it, the Snow fruit actually allows for way more creativity. Lightning is destructive, but quick. Snow, on the other hand, is a physical compound. Nami could do everything Monet did, and so much more. For example, she could combine her Climatac's heat balls with her new snow powers to create localized vacuum implosions. And in case you're wondering how she'd hold her Climatact while using Logia intangibility, the solution is simple. She can just have Usopp add a sea stone handle to it, exactly like how the tip of Smoker's Jeet weapon is made of sea stone so he can touch it. Now, Nami gets to show off her new powers pretty quickly. During the beginning of the Dressrosa arc, when Giola from the Don Quixote family sneaks onto the Sunny and tries to turn Nami into abstract art, Nami reflexively turns into snow, evades the attack, and passes through Giola like Big Chill, which severely lowers the temperature of her internal organs. This also knocks her out and reverts everyone back to normal. Alright, so far, Zoro has stolen 5 Devil Fruits, but let me tell you that there are still 5 more to go. In fact, there are 6 more to go, but one of them is going to be a special fruit. And then, at the end, we're also going to talk about potential Devil Fruits. So, just keep watching, and you'll see what I mean. The 6th steal happens as Zoro defeats Pika with his billion-fold world Trichiliochism technique. As Pika goes down, he drops the Stone fruit as loot. Now, the only Straw Hats on Dressrosa are Luffy, Zoro, Usopp, Robin, and Franky. Since everyone else is already a Devil Fruit user, Franky is the only option left. So, after the battle against Doflamingo is finally over and everyone is getting some rest, Zoro asks Franky if he'd be interested in eating the fruit. Franky's a bit unsure at first, and so Usopp steps in to sell the idea. He explains that the Stone fruit is basically perfect for Franky because of how it would complement his engineering skills. I mean, we know that back in Thriller Bark, Franky was able to build an impromptu wooden staircase directly into midair. He called it Franky Skywalk, and it's an engineering feat that only a One Piece character could pull off. So, if you give him the power of the Stone fruit, just imagine how his options would expand. As long as there's a decent amount of stone in the area, it becomes Franky's domain. So ultimately, Franky realizes how super useful this would be and decides to give it a shot. Now, the next arc for Zoro is Wano, because as you know, he doesn't beat any Devil Fruit users during Zou, and he wasn't around around during the Whole Cake Island arc. And speaking of Wano, the first devil fruit user he beats actually has that special fruit I mentioned earlier, but it's not special in a good way. It's special because it's the only fruit Zoro wins that is completely useless. We're talking about the artificial smile fruit eaten by Kamazo, or should I say, Kid's right-hand man, Killer. As Zoro cuts down Kamazo, he notices the smile fruit drop as loot. Obviously, he has no idea what this weird fruit is supposed to be, and he can't exactly ask Kamazo because the guy is knocked out cold. In fact, Zoro himself passes out from his injuries right after. When he wakes up later in the random shack where Hiyori treats his wounds, he realizes he has a bit of a problem. He can't just give away this mystery fruit to someone else without knowing what it does. Conveniently, he finds out the truth very soon. After Yasui's execution, Toko and the people of Ebisu Town start laughing uncontrollably through their tears. And then Hiyori explains the smile fruits to Zoro. He remembers how Kamazo was laughing like a maniac too, and it finally clicks. The fruit he is holding right now is a smile fruit, and obviously he can't give it to an ally, so he wonders if he should just feed it to some random weapon and get it over with. But nah, he can't be that cruel to an innocent weapon. He'll have to force feed it to an enemy. So Zoro rushes toward Kurozumi Orochi to stuff the smile fruit right down his throat. But of course, just like in the actual manga, he gets stopped by Kyoshiro. Then Orochi's ninja squad, the Oniwabanchu, are ordered to get him by their leader, Fukurokuju. And well, Zoro immediately jumps straight at Fukurokuju and force feeds him the smile fruit. The guy starts laughing all the time, and even though Orochi knows why, the guy still gets punished for laughing like that in front of Orochi, which causes friction between the Oniwabanchu and Orochi that hurts their performance during the raid on Onigashima. Meanwhile, over at the Udon prison, when Kid and Killer are brought in, Killer is no longer laughing constantly. He's back to his normal self, and he explains to Kid that he returned to normal after his fight with Roronoa Zoro, so he must have done something to fix him. Naturally, this makes Kid feel like he now owes a debt to the Straw Hat Pirates. Moving on, Zoro fights Gyukimaru to get his Shisui back, and in the manga, this fight gets interrupted by Kawamatsu, but here, Zoro manages to knock Gyukimaru out, and Gyukimaru drops a devil fruit as loot. This becomes Zoro's 7th steal, and his first mythical Zoan fruit. But what surprises both Zoro and Kawamatsu is the fact that the moment the fruit drops, Gyukimaru transforms right back into the fox Onimaru, who used to be the companion of Shimotsuki Ushimaru. They connect the dots and realize that Gyukimaru was actually the fox's mythical Zoan transformation. One thing leads to another, and after Onimaru leads them to the storage filled with thousands of stolen weapons, Zoro decides to feed the human fruit model Oniyudo to Shisui. Just like that, the legendary black blade once wielded gains sentience. The sword tells Zoro, Kawamatsu, and Hiyori the entire history of Ryuma's life. It even adds that Ryuma's zombie spirit felt pleased and honored when he passed the blade down to Zoro back in Thriller Bark. This shocks Kawamatsu and Hiyori because it means Zoro did in fact fight the legendary Ryuma himself. By the way, if you ask me about the story Shisui tells Zoro, I can't say anything other than the part where Ryuma cuts a dragon, so we won't know what Shisui told Zoro until Oda actually reveals Ryuma's life story in some random SBS. Anyway, after hearing Ryuma's lore, Zoro realizes that he can't accept Shisui. He has to turn his own blades into permanent black blades through his own grit and willpower. Hearing this, Shisui offers to explain exactly how a swordsman turns a regular blade into a black blade, but Zoro declines. If it was information he doesn't have to figure out himself, Mihawk would have already explained it to him. So he tells Shisui that he will figure it out on his own. And next, Hiyori gives Zoro her sword, Enma, just like she did in the manga. The raid starts off the same way as in canon, but with a few key differences. Kid and Killer are a bit more cooperative, while Usopp and Nami are much more useful. Can't say the same about Franky because devil fruit user or not, Franky is always super useful. Well, alright, it's time for Zoro's 8th steal, and this happens right before the battle on the rooftop, when Zoro cuts down Scratchman Apu and gets his sound fruit. But because he's in a rush to get to the roof, Zoro just keeps the fruit in his inventory, gives Chopper the antidote, and continues on. This leads right into the legendary Roof Piece Showdown, where Luffy, Kid, Law, Zoro, and Killer take on both Kaido and Big Mom. The fight has plenty of goofy moments, like Zoro trying to catch Kaido off guard by transforming his Sandai Kitetsu into a giraffe neck mid-swing, or even Zoro pulling off a 5-sword style by turning his legs into blades using his Dice fruit. But for the most part, the dynamic of the fight stays similar to the canon, at least until Killer thanks Zoro for removing the smile fruit from his body. Hearing this, Zoro remembers that Killer is not a devil fruit user right now, and so, after observing Killer's acrobatic fighting style, Zoro realizes that Apu's sound-based fruit would complement his style well. So right there in the middle of the big battle, he offers Killer Apu's sound fruit. Killer's a bit hesitant at first. I mean, can you blame him? He has no way of knowing if Zoro is trying to feed him another dud fruit. But since they're literally fighting two emperors of the sea, Killer understands Zoro wouldn't mess around, so he trusts him and eats it. And as you can expect, Killer becomes a much stronger and more creative fighter right away, even without a fruit. Killer's normal fighting style already involved spinning his scythes to generate sonic shockwaves, which is how he was able to bypass Kaido's scales and damage him from the inside in the actual manga. Well, with the sound fruit, he can now pull off internal damage attacks like that without even needing physical contact. He can even use his scythes to unleash air slashes that naturally emit musical notes, which trigger internal explosions inside his targets. And since he relies on acrobatic movements to dodge and weave through attacks, complementing his speed with invisible sound waves makes it nearly impossible for enemies to pin down. Overall, thanks to this, Zoro and Killer pull off some abnormal teamwork against Kaido's dragon form. But still, their haki is simply not enough to do any serious damage to Kaido, so it still ends up being up to Luffy to fight Kaido one-on-one. But of course, before Zoro drops out of the rooftop fight, he unleashes his final Asura attack to protect Luffy, just like he did in the actual manga, except this time, it's a 15 sword style, because aside from his 3 swords, he also turns his legs into steel blades before multiplying his body. And with this, he manages to leave a scar that's twice as deep as the one he leaves in the canon. Meanwhile, downstairs, Usopp and Nami are able to successfully beat Ulti all on their own, and after Nami strikes her with lightning, Usopp makes her explode, and then Nami uses her snow to lower the temperature of her internal organs, so she stays out cold for the remaining duration of the raid. Honestly, they become a diabolical duo. Usopp shoots explosive snot to blow enemies up, and then Nami follows it up with a blizzard to induce extreme thermal shock that instantly drains their physical stamina. Fast forward a bit, and Zoro defeats King the Conflagration. Naturally, King drops the ancient Zoan dragon fruit modeled Pteranodon as loot, and it gets stored in the inventory before Zoro collapses from pure exhaustion. The rest of the raid continues, and when all of Onigashima is caught in an unstoppable fire, Franky uses his stone fruit to literally reshape the rock formations of all of Onigashima to create safe pathways so all of their allies can escape the flames and get to safety. He does it so smoothly that Jinbei isn't even needed to redirect the water Raizo unleashes. It all simply flows through the corridors straight to the flames. Later, after the celebrations are done, Zoro visits Ryuma's grave and decides to feed the Pteranodon fruit to Enma. This gives Zoro's sword a lot of options. For example, Enma can now pull its hilt back and launch its blade forward at high speeds, kind of like King's bizarre tempura udon technique. Plus, it can extend its neck, flap its Pteranodon wings to generate powerful shockwaves, or sharpen its beak for piercing attacks. Zoro can even use the sword to literally fly. But why choose Enma for this fruit? Why not give the fruit to someone else, like Jinbei? Well, most of the crew is already devil fruit users, so they need someone like Jinbei to be there if anyone falls into the sea. Plus, even though the Pteranodon fruit would give Jinbei the ability to fly, it'd nerf most of Jinbei's actual fighting style, and it'd completely nerf all of Jinbei's undersea abilities. So because Zoro was impressed by how Shisui gained sentience thanks to the Oniudo fruit, Zoro decided to have Enma eat this fruit. Now, he may be able to understand its stubborn personality better. Of course, since Enma is already a difficult sword to control, the fruit may just make it more annoying to deal with. Plus, it'll definitely clash with Sandai Kitetsu being a giraffe. Zoro has his work cut out for him, but his fighting style is now only limited by his creativity. Moving on to the Egghead arc, Zoro's fight with S-Hawk is interesting because while both of them have the same fruits, Zoro has 2 swords who also have their own devil fruits. But still, instead of transforming his swords, he's able to overwhelm S-Hawk with just his standard 3-sword style. Now, of course, Zoro's actual big fight of this arc is against Lucci. He wins the fight, and Lucci drops his leopard fruit as loot. Zoro thinks about it and asks Sanji if he wants this fruit, but Sanji shuts him down. Even when Usopp tries to sell the idea, he makes it clear that he won't accept a devil fruit from Zoro, no matter what he ends up stealing. So for the time being, Zoro just pockets the Zoan fruit in his inventory. And guess what? This pays off big time during Elbath. Right before the main battle against Emu and the Domi Reversi giants, Zoro offers the leopard fruit to Hajrudin, and just think about it, a giant with a predatory Zoan! Plus, it also creates a neat thematic contrast with Loki. Hajrudin eats it, and thanks to the stat boost, he becomes strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Domi Reversi Bragi. Now, Lucci is the last devil fruit user Zoro has defeated in the manga, and of course, Zoro will soon beat Summers and gain Summers' Thorn fruit, but that battle's still pending. And speaking of pending battles, I promised that I'll also talk about Zoro's potential steals. So before we end today's video, let's go ahead and talk about that. Zoro's obvious future opponents are Mihawk, Saint Ethan Baron v Noosjiro, and Shiryu of the Rain. Since Mihawk doesn't have a devil fruit, Zoro can only steal powers from Noosjiro and Shiryu. And honestly, it's a mystery if Noosjiro would even drop a fruit as loot, since his abilities seem to come directly from Emu. That leaves us with Shiryu, and you bet, when Zoro defeats Shiryu and the clear fruit drops as loot, Sanji's gonna regret saying he'd never take a fruit from Zoro. Luckily, Zoro isn't petty. He hands the invisibility fruit over to Sanji, who finally gets to fulfill his lifelong childhood dream. Unfortunately for Sanji though, the moment he gets the fruit, Nami and Robin lock in and learn observation hockey so they can notice him whenever he tries to do anything sus. Well, alright. By this point, Zoro has stolen 11 fruits, or 12 if you count the clear fruit. But you must have noticed that his main sword, the Wano Ichimonji, still hasn't eaten any fruit. So what do you think? Which Zoan power would be the best fit for the Wano Ichimonji? Imagine if Zoro is the one who defeats Killingham instead of Sanji, and he gains the mythical Zoan dragon fruit model Kirin. If he feeds that to the Wano Ichimonji, he'd gain the power to manifest nightmares. At that point, Zoro truly would become the King of Hell. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and click on this video next for more anime content. Go on, check it out!